Welcome back to a very sad Why Blank Lost. I'm David Bloomberg, and I'm in mourning, like my co host Jessica Lewis was last week, because my winner
No,
pick followed hers out of the game. I
listen. You know what? I was going to try to be supportive and kind. But and I can't now. Oh, come on. Do I have to be nice because your winner pick got voted out now
you
that
have
you're crying and you're upset?
you have to pretend to be nice.
That's fair. That is a rule that I am familiar with.
Yes,
Um,
yes,
but it's interesting that your winner pick did follow my winner pick out the door. I might have actually talked a little bit about why
you
he
did.
probably shouldn't have targeted Soda, right? Yes. But
Someone
also,
someone said on Twitter, "Are you going to give Jessica credit for this prediction, even though it happened sooner than she thought?" And I went, "No, no, of course not."
oh, of course not. Of course not. You hear all this? Of course not. But I also want to say this. Isn't it interesting that our namesakes followed each other out the door?
Hmm.
And now our winner picks have followed each other out the door. We definitely have a negative impact on the Survivor universe.
Oh, we do, which is why I'm wearing this shirt because
Mm,
Tevin, my prediction is why you lost. So there's
very
the there's
appropriate.
there's the
Mhm.
spoiler. Because otherwise, the rest of the time, all you can see is an arrow pointing up towards me, and you don't know what it says. Um,
It could say so many things.
it could, and I'm sure now we'll hear about those things. Um,
Mhm.
so, but all right, well, we know that Tevin has performed Shakespeare as an actor. So I turned to that author for words of wisdom on handling the loss of Tevin.
Oh,
And,
this is
and
amazing.
I found these wise words. Instead of weeping when a tragedy occurs in a songbird's life, it sings away its grief. I believe we could well follow the pattern of our feathered friends.
Hmm.
Now, nobody wants me singing, but I will instead do kind of my equivalent.
Are you
Birds,
gonna rap?
no, birds sing. I talk about whether or not Survivor players follow my rules. So, with that in mind, let's put aside our grief that Tevin is gone from the game and follow our usual path of comparing how he played to my rules for winning that I originally wrote way back after season one and have been updating ever since, using all the non spoiler information available to us from what we saw on TV, interviews, social media, and secret scenes. The
I
newest
just want you to
version.
know I'm interrupting you. I just want you to be prepared. And just because you cried and you're acting upset
Mhm.
doesn't mean I'm gonna be nice. I just want you to know this.
So you're not following the fifth
I'm not
rule?
gonna follow the rules. I'm not.
Well, people who want to know what the fifth rule specifically says can find all of the rules at robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed
True.
and click on the link bubble for the Survivor rules. But before we address how Tevin did in terms of the rules, we always have some other things to discuss from the episode.
Oh boy, do we.
I was going to say exactly that. Yeah, because Q. All
Q.
we have to say is one letter. Q.
Right. Q.
Now,
What the Q?
what the
What's
Q?
going on?
I know there is a divergence of opinions on the question of whether or not Q actually wanted to quit. I come down firmly on the side that he had no intention of actually doing it, and it was all part of another one of his plans.
Oh yes, those plans.
Yes. And indeed, my immediate thought when Q brought up quitting, as I was live tweeting the episode, was another weird Q plan to, quote, test people.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have to remember, this is by no means the first time this has come up. And every time he said essentially the same thing, that he was seeing where people stood. When he brought it up at Yanu, he said on Twitter, no one is quitting. Part of it was trying to test to see if voting me out is an option for them. Later, Q once again talked as if he was ready to quit, but it was a ploy to get Kenzie to not play shot in the dark if they went back to tribal council. And that one we actually had him on the show talking about. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
when he said that he threw last week's immunity challenge, he explained that he wanted to test his alliance for when he wasn't protected. So this was nothing new. In fact, I'm now thinking there was another time it happened when we didn't see it. Because when Jelinski said in his interviews that Q brought up quitting first, I figured that, and we had talked about it, that he had said
Mm-hmm.
something that Jelinski misunderstood, because neither of us thought Q would use that as a strategy to fool Jelinski into quitting and therefore branding him as a
That's
quitter.
fair.
Now, with everything that's happened since, I think that was exactly what Q did. I think he brought up quitting, and Jelinski was like, yes, let's quit. And then Q went back to everyone and went, that Jelinski, he's a quitter.
Mm.
And of course, it worked the first time. So he was going to keep doing it. And I really do think that's what was going through his mind this time. Throw everyone off, test the waters by saying he was going to quit.
I find it fascinating if that's really what the plan was, because in one vein, like, that's really incredible, like, strategy. If you, like, really, like, deep down, like,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to a place that people don't normally go in Survivor, because I'm sorry, when someone says, "Put my name down, I wanna go home," 9 times out of 10, everyone's like, "Cool, bye.
Okay.
Yeah, get out." That's the reaction.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if there is some method to his chaos, because the things that he is focusing on and utilizing, like hide and go seek, are you kidding me?
Yes.
Like, really? Like, somehow now if you're good at hide and go seek, that means you're really good at Survivor.
Right.
It's just, yeah, it's incredible that he is taking these risks, if that's really like what he's doing. If he has made a concerted effort to play the game in this fashion, well then goddamn, he is changing the game. He called himself a game changer, so maybe he
Right.
really
At the
is,
beginning of
because
the
yeah,
beginning of the episode.
because this is it sounds like lunacy. Like, who would actually put themselves out there and be like, "Vote for me. I caused some problems. Vote for me." But I thought what was very interesting, and this is the one thing that makes me feel like what your thought process
Mm-hmm.
is correct, is what he said to Tiffany during the tribal council, when he was like, "Listen, there was votes coming your way. They were going to be voting you out. Like, I needed to do something."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, wow, that's like, that is a whole nother level. If you're really doing, you're putting your neck out to try to save her, but at the same time, you're making yourself look like we saw everybody reacting at the tribal council. Like, everyone had their heads in their hands and were like, what is going on? Nobody knew what was
Yes.
going on. So if he makes it to the end, he is going to have some serious explaining to do, because I don't think anyone is going to feel that about anything he's doing. And maybe they'll have a light bulb moment if that's what he's doing. And maybe he'll explain it in a way that they
Mm-hmm.
understand it to be that. But wow, very risky if that's what he's doing. Very
Yeah.
risky.
And when I say that he might have been doing it to test the waters, I think this could even extend to how the vote shook out. Now, I may be stretching things here, but in this tribal council, when he said that, Tiffany was strongly saying Q should stay, while Tevin made comments indicating, if Q wants to go, we're not going to coddle him.
Right.
And I know I'm dipping my toes into discussions we'll have later in the rules, but I do wonder if that played a role in Q's decision in his private tribal council conversations to push to get rid of Tevin instead of sticking with his original Tiffany plan. Because he's always said he wants to test to see what people did, and
Right.
Tevin, in his mind, maybe fell for it. It's a possibility.
It certainly is. The other part too that I think is very interesting about Q's methodology is this idea where he says, if you come after someone in the six, well, then you got to go home. Well, that's what he did just the last vote, right?
No,
So,
because Tim came after someone with the in the six in terms of Hunter. So then he had to get rid of
oh,
him.
I see. So
Yes,
that's okay. Because I was like, I'm like, wait a second, but he voted out Tim,
yes,
but that's why he voted out Tim.
right,
Understood.
right.
This is a very terrible alliance.
Yeah, well, yeah.
It's very
um,
terrible.
yeah, I have thoughts on that too. But
I'm sure.
um, now we are not the only people who think this was part of potentially part of a grand Q plan. Jeff said he didn't think Q was serious about quitting, and for one rare moment of time, I agree with Jeff. Uh,
Mm.
Rob gave some interesting reasons on know-it-alls to support why Q, it said it was all a strategy. One was the same thing you just mentioned about his conversation with Tiffany.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, on know-it-all, Stephen's main point in taking the opposite side seemed to be that because I said it was strategy, he had to go the other way. He had to argue.
Well,
So,
you and Steven.
yes. Now, among other important points that Rob made was that during the quote unquote live portion of the tribal council, Q was not at all acting upset that he wasn't getting voted out, nor did he seem that way at the end. If he really
Mm.
wanted to get voted out, we've seen people who wanted to get voted out and didn't. One was on Rob's season.
Mm-hmm.
One Rob's season. But uh, there it's not the attitude that Q showed. And they were the actions of a man who wanted to retake control or an appearance of control. And that's where I'm leaning. I think he did it because he was just a participant in the planned vote. He was notified at the end. After doing this in tribal council, he stirred things up. He helped direct the way it went. And therefore, he regained an appearance of control in his mind. Now, with that said, this really wasn't much of a live tribal council because
Right.
all they did was revert back to the original plan. But of course, as you and I have talked about many times, that's what happens in most so-called live tribal councils.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a very fascinating concept. I'm very intrigued to see what the response will be
Mm-hmm.
next week when they all have to return to tribal council and say, what was that? Because this is one of those situations where I don't think that Q can get away with not explaining himself
Right.
immediately. Like he's going to have to. And I'm very much interested in that particular explanation.
Yeah. I mean, next episode will be an interesting one for him. And, do I think it was a good move for Q? No, absolutely not.
No.
He's definitely overplaying. My friend, Dr. Jeremy Faust, noted to me in a conversation that Q's move went against what he told Banu, which is don't use tribal council to shake things up.
Right.
Uh, and, people are already annoyed based just on what they were saying at tribal council. So, yeah.
Oh, what are the that was just such a great everything about
Mm-hmm.
the chaotic nature, the responses, the facial expressions, the
Mm-hmm.
commentary, the voting booth confessionals. Oh gosh, it was so
Yeah.
entertaining. Yes, it was so entertaining.
Yes. Now, moving away from Q shaking things up to him failing to do so, he wanted people to sit out with him and Liz for rice, but couldn't get the necessary numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff later worded it to say they couldn't come to a deal on the rice. But the thing is, Jeff wasn't dealing. He made a demand, and it was his
Yes.
way or the highway, or I guess I should say his way or the high pole. Um,
Mm.
yes, he offered, quote unquote, to take away the votes of two people instead. But I was very happy to see the players all shoot him down on that one immediately. Like, no, Jeff, that's not a deal.
Yeah, and this like rice negotiation, while it was fun the first couple of times,
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of over it at this point. Like,
Well, like I
and I
said, it's
get
not a
it.
negotiation. They tried to negotiate.
Right. It's not. And I will say that there are what I appreciate more are
Mm-hmm.
those unexpected moments when a survivor player says, "You know what? I'm going to try to get something from Jeff." And that's where the
Right.
race negotiation really stemmed from. It
Right.
was, you know, and it didn't come from a planned thing. It was like, "Hey, we need rice. So can we negotiate?" And I think that's so much more fun because you are giving the players an opportunity to say, "Jeff, this is what we're willing to give
Mm-hmm.
you. Is that enough?" And then you can negotiate and go back and forth and make some determinations. But when you are like, "It's this and that's the only option," and then I'll give you an even more terrible option
Right.
to choose from, and you're like,
Yeah.
"No, thank you." So, yeah, it's, I agree. It wasn't much of a negotiation at
Yeah.
all.
It's like someone at a garage sale marking a T-shirt for $15, and someone walking up and going, "I'll, I'll give you 5 for it." No, it says 15.
Yeah. I'm
You
like,
won't
"Oh,
deal at
okay."
all. Well, I'll take your car. You know, no,
Okay.
that's not. You're not dealing. This is not.
Right, right. Yeah, that's not how it works.
Yeah. Now, I have the last two things I want to discuss before we move to the rules are admittedly a couple of I told you so moments. Not I told you, but I told
Oh,
other
I was gonna say,
people.
what'd
Not
I
you.
do
Not
next?
you. Not you.
Okay. Okay.
I should have reworded that. I told them so moments. Um, we began this episode with a previously on that provided a scene they hadn't shown before,
Mm,
which I always find them annoying when they do that because on other shows I will sometimes skip previously ons.
right, right.
And if I weren't watching this live, I would probably skip previously on, and therefore I wouldn't have seen it. But watching it live, I was like, wait a minute, what just happened? Um, because, yeah, Tevin was saying that his vote against Venus was a just in case vote. Now, Survivor producers could have saved a lot of social media commenters some embarrassment if they'd shown that last week so that those people didn't insist and argue that Tevin couldn't have been the one who orchestrated the soda vote because he didn't even vote for her,
Right,
as if we've never seen a vote split before.
right. Mhm.
It's funny how all those people got dead silent after the episode and stopped arguing. Real weird.
Crazy, right?
Yeah.
Strange.
And then in continuing, I told them so mode. There was an Entertainment Weekly secret scene of Maria talking to Ben and grilling him about whether he or Tim had the Sega idol. And she was absolutely certain he was being dishonest. Now, when we did Why Jem Lost, we said it wasn't that her tribe mates suspected her of having the idol, but for the other reasons that we discussed. And we
Mhm.
got a few comments, whether on social media, TikToks, wherever, saying, no, it was the idol. Once again, this scene definitely settled that one as well. So,
Look at
yes,
you.
yes.
You're just winning points today.
Yeah.
Actually, but you're minus a winner. So
Ooh,
there's that.
ouch, ouch.
Just saying.
Gotta
Maybe you're at
bring back
negative.
my cleanup.
Oh, there's your
Yeah,
tissue.
yeah.
Oh.
All right. Well, there were, of course, some other things going on, and I'll be putting some of those in my TikToks at David Bloomberg TV. Is there anything else you want to discuss before we move on?
I do want to touch upon hide and seek just one more time
Okay.
because
You start
all we
counting.
a couple of things.
Mm-hmm.
One, I think it's fascinating that they were talking about having downtime because all we have been told with this new version of Survivor is there's no time to do anything. So it's like, but then you have all of this time to play hide and go seek. That is a massive island, I happen to know. And wow, to play hide and go seek in that place must have been incredible. But
I mean, they
also
only
I'm
had 40 seconds to run away from Charlie when he was counting. So,
yeah, but you can still make some good headway. And then if he's not coming in your direction, you could move again. But needless to say,
yeah.
playing hide and go seek on a massive island, that must have been incredibly fun. So I enjoyed that segment. So thank you for, that moment that we were able to watch them have some fun out there. And that it was actually part of the episode. But then Q turned it into a whole thing, which is awesome.
And
So
Venus was doing, they were interspersing Q and
yes.
Venus analyzing people over
Yeah.
this. And it was just
It
like,
was great. Yeah, the Mariah putting things in her hair, and suddenly that was
Liz, Mariah's gone.
no, Maria. No, it was okay. No,
Oh, Maria.
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 Maria put things
Yeah.
in her hair. There's too many names that are close and people that look the same. Can we stop doing this, please? I can't handle it. But yeah, she put the things in her hair, and it was like, and then Tiffany's hiding with something red, and what is she thinking? It was
Yeah. Oh,
fascinating,
yeah.
absolutely fascinating that there was such an incredible response from at least those two individuals about
Yes.
playing this game. And Hunter was basically asleep in a tree the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah. All
Good
right.
times.
Well, before we go on to how Tevin did, we want to mention that the rules we're about to discuss come in a shorter and much more colorful version in
Yes, they
poster
do.
form. Go to robhaswebsite.com/yxlostfeed, scroll down to the poster, click on it, order it, and it will be delivered to you.
It
Uh,
will be.
In addition, you can also keep scrolling and get the poster on a t-shirt. And then you can keep scrolling and get the checklist on a t-shirt.
Get it all.
So I don't know how long it takes to get t-shirts at this point, but if you want them in time for the Chicago RHAP gathering, hurry
Ooh,
up and order
yes.
now. Yeah.
You definitely should. Oh, that would be so fun if people were wearing the
Yes.
t-shirts. Love that.
Yes. So again, that's robhaswebsite.com/yxlostfeed.
You could buy a poster and just tack it onto your shirt if you need to.
Or you could buy 2 posters and wear them as, what are those called?
Mhm.
Sandwich boards?
Yes, I love this idea. You should
Yeah.
do that, David.
I don't think so. Um, but if someone
I
else
think
wants to, I'm all for it. But,
I love this.
yeah.
I think that'd be a great idea.
All right. Well, Tevin seemed to be in a great position with multiple alliances spanning different original tribes. He was in a tight 2, a tight 3, a 6, a side alliance, and probably more. He had just blindsided someone he believed was a threat to him going forward. So,
Mhm.
how did literally everyone but his Andy Griffith ally suddenly turn against him? It's time to figure out why Tevin lost. We begin, of course, with the first and most important rule, which is to scheme and plot. While Venus told us this week that Tevin was a fish out of water in the strategy part of the game, it will surprise exactly nobody that I'm going to say she was wrong. Uh, he just hid that side of himself from her as he played
Mm.
her and let her believe she was the strategic mastermind, which was indeed strategy on his part.
Mhm.
But it was also weird of her to say that because earlier in the game, Venus complained Tevin has a deep personal connection with literally everyone but me. Now, maybe she saw that as social and not strategy, but it
Yeah.
was definitely strategy on his part, as he told us in that same episode that he was indeed attached to everyone except Venus.
Well, I think that's something that we've talked about quite a bit is that there seems to be a misunderstanding amongst some survivor players that strategy cannot include the social component of
Mhm.
it, that they feel that the two are separate, but someone like Tevin really did mend them together beautifully. He
Yeah.
found a reason to connect with someone and utilize that to form a bond, but then utilize that as an alliance and strategic gameplay. And so there is a lot to be said about taking those things and putting them together as opposed to feeling that they're completely separate. However, we have seen that as well, where someone
Right.
can have a very close social relationship, but no strategic relationship.
Yep.
And the fact that Tevin was able to put them together, I think certainly helped his game, but also maybe hurt it a little bit.
Mm.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we know he was very tight with Hunter in the Andy Griffith alliance I
Mhm.
referenced. We've since learned Liz was also in there too, as a tight 3, who made up the Shelter alliance.
Mhm.
Indeed, Tevin told Mike Bloom, I never in a million years thought that Liz would be the person to vote me out. For a while, he had Soda as well, until, of course, he didn't think he could trust her anymore, which we'll discuss in Rule 2. In addition to all of that, he had an alliance with Maria from the first journey that we didn't know about until interviews.
Mhm.
And of course, he was in the 6, which, by the way, you know, 2 weeks ago, I called it the Journey Alliance because that's what they were calling it. Last week, I said, okay, now they're calling it the +1 Alliance, so I'll call it that. And this week, everybody just calls it the 6, the
The
6.
6. This
So
it's fluid. It
it's,
just as
yeah,
just as the people who
yeah,
are part of the 6 are fluid, the name is fluid as well.
yes, yes. So anyway, when it came to allies and strategy, I think Tevin seemed to be doing quite well.
Yeah.
Now, we know Tevin was the one who mainly orchestrated Soda's blindside. And then he was continuing to think about next moves and even further into the game. And one reason he decided to target Soda at that moment was that Q told him to vote out Venus. And he didn't just want to be doing Q's bidding, or else if they had made it to the end, it would look like Q had been the one directing everything.
Right, right. Yeah, I think that was an interesting response,
Hmm.
because I do think, a lot of people thought, well, he couldn't possibly have orchestrated the Soda vote because he voted for Venus, but I do think that this is one of those strategic minds where it's I am looking steps ahead, and
Mhm.
he's already planning on I now if I vote Venus, I can tell Soda I never put her name down as I
Right.
promised I would never do. And so it's a multiple layer thing where it's not just I'm going to orchestrate a blind side. I'm going to get everybody to vote the way that I want. And I'm going to save face. There will be no blood on my hands. However, at the end, I get to say, Soda, I might have orchestrated it, but I didn't put your name down just as I promised. And so, yeah, you still got her voted out, but at least you held true to that particular promise you made.
Right. Right. Now, of course, the whole Soda vote led to a lot of people thinking he moved against her too soon, which takes us into the second rule, which
Hmm.
says not to scheme and plot too much and to keep your scheming secret. Rob wondered on the postgame show if Tevin would have been voted out if Soda had still been there, and concluded that it wouldn't have been so much Soda saving him, but rather the series of events that led to him being voted out probably wouldn't have occurred, and therefore he made the move against Soda too soon.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, it's hard to say for sure what would have happened, but Rob was definitely right that the spark for the Tevin vote was Liz's reaction to how he was acting after the Soda vote. So, tracking
Hmm.
it back, it makes sense that it indeed wouldn't have happened. However, I don't know that I can fully agree he made the move against Soda too soon. We talked extensively last week about how Tevin was working with the information he had available to him. And in all of his interviews, Tevin might as well have been quoting us. He said almost the exact same thing,
Mm.
noting that watching the game of Survivor and playing the game of Survivor are two different things, and that people watching have more information than he had. When you're
Right.
playing, you don't have that information. I even had made a TikTok clip of part of our discussion on that point.
Hmm.
And Tevin continued by saying that knowing what he knows now, he wouldn't have voted Soda out. But with the information he had, he would do it again.
I'm curious if he needed to do a little more digging then in order to have more information. Like, is there something he could have learned from someone if he had just had an additional conversation? Because I'm very curious that his number one, who was Hunter, didn't come to him and say, "Hey, by the way, like this is happening." So I'm wondering
Oh,
if it
about this
was,
vote, not
yes,
about
about this
Soda.
particular vote.
Okay, I
Right.
thought you were okay.
No, because I'm just kind of putting it all together in my
Mhm.
mind where even Hunter might have been looking at Tevin and going, "Ugh, if he's willing," so, like, I'm curious what Hunter felt about Soda and the relationship that he thought Tevin and Soda had, and so I don't know if maybe he needed to have more conversations with people who might have been closer to Soda to try to make some determinations about the relationship and is she someone that he could actually trust? Because
I
I do think that this was a domino effect for him. And yes, he probably didn't have all of the information as he indicated. And I truly believe that because I know what it feels like when you're going
Mhm.
through that and not having all the information. But perhaps he needed to have additional conversations to try to gain more knowledge, but I'm not sure if he would have actually
Well,
been successful.
but he did have those conversations. I mean, he did talk to Hunter. Hunter was like, "Yes, let's get rid of her." Randon, before Randon left, he had been talking about Soda's not trustworthy to Tevin.
Mm,
Liz had been wanting Soda out forever, as she reiterated in this episode. And so, with all the information that he had, plus the information that he was getting from his allies, he could not trust that the alliance with Soda was good based on what he was seeing.
mm,
And, adding in what he said in interviews, he knew how close Soda and Venus were at the beginning. But Soda told him that he was her number one. So he saw two possibilities. Either Venus was still her number one and she lied to him, because, of course, they hadn't seen Survivor 45 and didn't know you could have more than one number one. Um,
mhm.
or she had tossed Venus aside, which meant she could do the same to him because he saw how close they had been.
Right, right.
So, between those two options, he just didn't feel like he could trust her.
Right, and I think that that is certainly a justifiable
Hmm.
reason to feel that way and to want to take her out, but I still feel like even if he felt that way about her and didn't feel like he could
Hmm.
trust her, knowing all of that information that he knew, that everyone was okay with Soda because no one could trust her. Like everyone was okay with Soda being voted out because they didn't feel like she was trustworthy. Then I put her in kind of a category then along with someone like Venus where they're like, well, we know what Venus's game is, and so we don't need to worry about Venus. He could have taken the same approach with Soda because he knows all of these people are on his side. They all said, "Yes, I'd be willing to
Mhm.
vote out Soda." Which means if Soda came to them and said, "I want to vote out Tevin," maybe they wouldn't have been willing to vote out Tevin. So he had enough people, I think, in his corner that he could have said, let's hold off then on Soda because there's already a faction of individuals here who want to vote her out. We can get to her later. If she stays, we can take care of someone else now that maybe would be a little more difficult because Soda apparently wouldn't be a difficult vote because there were so many people who
Well,
wanted her voted out.
except that was those people in the split tribal council.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about the split tribal.
Yes.
Ugh,
And it also limited his choices. I mean,
yeah.
his choices were I don't remember exactly, but he talked about basically his only other option was Charlie, and he didn't want to do that because he had something going with Maria.
Can we stop with the split tribals? Thank you.
Well, yes. Um, so you know,
Yeah.
did
I
he do
mean,
it too soon? We could say that in hindsight. I find it difficult to do so myself. He can't read minds. He made a reasonable conclusion based on the impressions and facts that were available to him.
mhm. No, and I forgot about the split tribal as
Yeah,
well, because that's certainly something that is going to limit his options greatly.
yeah. Now, another part of this rule says to keep your scheming secret. Tevin knew he should do that and specifically said he wasn't going to publicly claim the soda vote until later. But then he told Liz because, as I mentioned earlier, she was the last person he expected would blindside him. Turned out she was the first person.
Right.
Not because it was a revelation to her that he'd done this, but because it made her realize that him claiming the move could be a threat to her later, which of course we'll discuss in the sixth rule.
Yes, and this is something that all future Survivor players should be very mindful of. Assume everyone will vote you out because it doesn't matter if you're the
Yes,
number 1, number 2, number 3, or if you don't get along at all. You can be voted out by anyone at any point in time, so always expect that.
yes, yes. All right. Well, we could go to the third rule, which tells players to be flexible. How do you think Tevin did here?
I think Tevin was I mean, just the list that you've already provided of all
Hmm.
of the variables that he had for alliances speaks volumes of his willingness to be flexible. He did have a 2, he had a 3, he had a 6, he had a probably a 4. I mean, he had options all over the place. And so I do think that his gameplay really it thrived on being flexible because he needed to have options and was keeping options open. And I will say he even tried with Venus, which I have to give him some credit for as well in this rule because he was
Hmm.
understanding that Venus is affecting my game, is affecting other people. I need to try to make this work with her. And he even tried to have an alliance with her. And so again, he was trying to be flexible and then the same thing happened with Venus that had been happening and she threw him under the bus
Yeah.
again. He was like, "Okay, that's it. I'm done." But he tried. And so I do
Right.
think that he really took this rule and ran with it because he had so many options available to him and who he wanted to actually play the game with. And also understood that even though he needed to be flexible, he was still locked in with these people. And so it was this
Hmm.
interesting mix when, with the Charlie thing that you had mentioned, where he didn't want to vote out Charlie because of the relationship that he had with Maria. And so I think that he struggled a little bit because he wanted to be flexible, but also knew when he couldn't be. So I think that that also worked for him well as well.
I agree with everything you said. Some people could say voting out Soda removed some flexibility, one possibility, but we've already discussed how he didn't see it
Mm-hmm.
that way.
Right.
One thing I do think is interesting to note is that Liz said on Twitter that Tevin and Hunter were her day one allies, and then suddenly they got to merge and they disappeared on her, like only coming to talk to her at the end of the day. So it's possible, perhaps likely, that Tevin got a little too comfortable with Liz while also working with his 6. And
Mm,
again, we heard him say at one point he was sure Liz would vote with them. And to maintain flexibility, you need to ensure that you keep those relationships going and not let
yeah.
anyone feel like they've fallen away.
Yes. And that is a very fair point. Agreed.
All right. Well, the fourth rule tells players not to let their emotions control them. And Tevin voting out Soda showed how well he did in this rule
Mm,
because there was never any doubt that he liked Soda. It was always a matter of trust. As he told Mike Bloom, two things can be true at once. And one of the things that was true, as I said in all my confessionals, I adore Soda. For my game, I can't trust her, but me and her aligned so beautifully in other ways. So we had kind of locked in from the beginning. So whether people agree with, what I said earlier in terms of what he believed was right, based on the information he had available, or whether they think he still shouldn't have done it, it's clear that Tevin followed this rule in keeping his emotions out of the decision.
Yes. And I think that he seemed to do that throughout the duration of his game as well, where it really was strategic, but then he kept his emotions to the side. I mean, just look at the chaos that happened in the past, in the last tribal
Hmm.
council. I mean, it was really quite chaotic, and even though he was willing to go with Q, I don't think that that was coming from an emotional standpoint. I think that was just coming from a
Right.
gameplay where, like, well, he wants to go home, let's let him go home,
Hmm.
send him home. So yes, I think he did great with this as well.
Yeah, I mean, and we could even look to the conversation you just mentioned that he had with Venus,
Mm-hmm.
because we know how he felt about her, and yet he kept her around even after that because he felt it was a more advantageous play to do something different. Other people in his position would have taken her out the minute he was able, but he put his feelings aside for the sake of what he felt was better strategy.
But in the same vein, they when they tried to come back together, I don't think he ever actually made Venus feel like she was as welcome as he thought he was doing. And so that I think had a little bit of a negative effect on him.
Hmm.
But it seems like Venus was rubbing a lot of people the wrong way. And so I don't think he would have been the only one making her feel
Yeah.
that way. So I can't necessarily fault him for doing so because he did try.
Right. Now that takes us more into the fifth rule, which is, the players have to pretend to be nice and play the social game.
Mhm.
And before I have some things to say about the whole Venus situation there, but before we get to that, there is so much we can say about how well Tevin did here. So I want to start by quoting some things Randon told Mike Bloom. He said, "I love Tevin. It's hard not to like Tevin, and that's his
Mm.
biggest weapon." And then me, not Randon, would add that not only is Tevin a really nice guy, but he also does what this rule says and pretends even when he's not feeling it with someone.
Yeah.
And, as Randon also said, he has this beautiful acting talent. And this is where we get to Venus because we saw him use it on her several times, such as when she was proclaiming she had controlled the soda blind side. And he was just sitting there buttering her up, letting her believe that he agreed with her. This was one of the best examples of pretending to be nice ever.
Mm. And he controlled his emotions at that tribal council
Right.
when Soda was, like, giving her all the credit. He didn't
Yes.
go, hold up, that was me."
Right.
So I'm jumping back to the 4th rule
Yeah.
here, but yes,
Yeah.
yeah, that I think that's a very good point.
Now, as you had mentioned, this was not the first time Tevin had to put on his social game hat and try to deal with Venus. He noted in his interviews that, while we saw part of that conversation with Venus in a secret scene a few weeks back, that wasn't all of it. He wanted to quash their beef, but he noted that every time he tried to explain things to her, she would cut him off or insert only her perspective,
Mm.
which I have to say is not exactly a surprise to either of us on this podcast, given what we've noted about her and her perspective previously. But Tevin kept at it. And again, she just kept saying he was interpreting things wrong. He
Mm.
plugged away, and it all just kept coming back to that, according to what he said in his interview. And I find that incredibly ironic because she was the one who last week complained about her perception of how Maria had spoken to her.
Yeah.
And so she's out there saying you're interpreting things wrong, but then when Maria says something to her, oh, it has to be that way. It can't be an interpretation issue. Um, but in any case, the point I'm getting at is that Tevin tried and tried, and by the end, he thought he had gotten through to her. And then within moments, like you said, she was throwing his name out as a target. But at least
Yeah,
he
and I
tried.
think he did, and I really do think that just going back to the beginning of the season with Venus, and there did seem to be a disconnect between she and a lot of the people on the tribe.
Mhm.
And she talked about this in her confessionals, just how she doesn't feel like she's in with the group and that they're kind of keeping her on the outs. And she was all excited when Randon brought her in with
Mhm.
the immunity that he had found, or the clue that he had
Right.
found, and she finally thought she had like some footing in the game. And so I'm wondering if all of that has just kept her in this mindset now where no matter what these people try to do to keep me around, they didn't want to bother with me in the beginning,
Mhm.
but now they want to bother with me because I'm a vote. And instead of that, I'm done with that. I'm not going to do that. I'm just wondering how much of an effect that had on her. Like if they had taken her under their wing a little bit sooner, maybe we wouldn't be having this conflict with Venus and so many people on the tribe, because she wouldn't feel the need to have to step up and want credit and want to be seen and want to play a little more dangerously
Mhm.
and let people see her, because she wants to forge her own path and not be with these people.
I
I'm
mean
wondering if maybe that's part of what happened there.
Soda did take her under her wing. That was part of what got Soda voted out,
Well, right.
and Randon tried. And Tevin, although he said in his interviews that he did not like the way she was treating him, so he just kind of was like, I'm done with
Right.
you, until he remembered, oh, this is a game. I need to try to deal with her.
Mhm.
And he knew how she was feeling. He explained, okay, I think you're feeling this way, that we're shutting you out, but here's why that's not the case. And everything to her came back again to her perspective,
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, we've talked about that plenty before.
No, I know. I
Yeah.
find it interesting.
Yeah. So let's go to the sixth rule, which warns against being too much of a threat. And this is obviously a key issue when it comes to Tevin. It's interesting because he was trying to reduce his threat level after the soda blind side, in part by letting Venus go on about how she did it, and in part by just lying low right after it. Unfortunately for him, that wasn't enough. While Venus proclaimed she'd done it, everyone knew she hadn't.
Mm,
Tevin, of course, as we mentioned, talked to Liz about it, but as he noted to Dalton Ross, he was working with her.
yeah.
What he didn't realize was that Liz got worried about him and how his game impacted her own, because she said she couldn't have people believing he was the mastermind and she was just floating along.
Mm,
And she also said she looked back at the last 15 days and realized how often she let someone else take the lead. Although I do have to mention that, to be fair, for most of those 15 days, there wasn't really much of a decision to be made for anyone on her tribe.
right, right,
Uh,
right.
but but as she added on Twitter, that she said in the episode, if she didn't make a move soon, she was going to get swallowed up by the game.
Yeah. I think this is an interesting moment for Tevin. He could have treated this differently, because there was a conversation that he was having with Liz prior to the soda vote. And she was like, I've been wanting to vote soda out since the
Mm-hmm.
beginning. And I feel like the conversations that he had with her after the fact, he probably could have given her some of the credit too. As opposed to like the laughing and,
Yeah.
and poking fun at Venus and her thinking that she's the one who did
Mm-hmm.
it, because it was very dramatic when he
Yes.
was when he was talking to Liz about that. So I think maybe it would have been a good idea for him to quietly accept that, we know that Venus didn't do that. And
Yeah.
just, like we talked about it on the beach. We both wanted her to go
Yeah.
home.
Use we more instead of I.
Yes, exactly, because then maybe her response to it would have been like, "Yeah, look what we did, and I was
Mm-hmm.
the one that actually gave." So then if you make it to the finals, then the 2 of them, if they're both there, can duke it out as to who actually
Right.
came up with the plan, as opposed to, even though you're working with her, don't try to take ownership of it, because you did have a conversation with her about it and she was in full agreement and had been wanting to vote her out. So I think we would have been a much better word choice.
Yes, yes. Now, of course, Liz wasn't the only one worried about Tevin for various reasons. As just a few examples, Kenzie said Tevin has a social charisma like she's never seen. In real life, that's amazing. In a game for $1 million, that's got to go. Tiffany referenced how Tevin had an extra vote, which added to his threat. Charlie worried that the 6 was going to lead to a path where he would get to the end with a bunch of people he couldn't beat, one of whom was, of course, Tevin.
Right.
Now, while I understand Tevin wanting to pull it back a bit after the soda vote, I think he was already too high profile and needed to stay in the mix of the discussion so he could better identify what was happening, maybe head things off when his name came up. It was, not quite as much as, but it would be like Q saying, okay, now I'm going to take a back seat. No, it's too
Yeah.
late. You're already
Yeah.
out in front. I mean,
Right.
he wasn't quite to that level by any means, but he was a lot more out front than I think he realized.
Yes. And I think once the soda vote happened, that
Mm-hmm.
put him so much farther in front. It pushed him way in the front.
Yes.
So yes, everyone gets see Tevin up there.
Yeah. Now, I guess we should briefly mention something we already discussed before getting to the rules, which, as I had mentioned, was Tevin's response to Q saying he was going to quit. If indeed we're right, and it was a ploy to see how people would react, then, like I said, Tevin mentioning that they shouldn't coddle him and indicating he'd be okay with Q leaving could have been seen by Q as a threat. I know it seems like a stretch. Sometimes I come in here and I'm like, I am certain that this is what happened. I'm not saying that with this one. I just think it's a possibility.
I think it's a fair possibility, because if that is really what Q was doing and that was Tevin's response, because I do think that Tevin was vocal about that to
Mm-hmm.
the group. It wasn't something that he was just saying in a little group
Yeah.
over here.
He responded to Jeff about it.
Yeah, I mean, so it was like everybody knew the approach, but also that seems like an appropriate response, right? Because
Yes.
if someone says, please vote me out, I would be like, okay, and how do you spell your name? Okay,
Yeah.
done. Like
It's kind of easy.
Q.
Q.
So I do think that response coming from Tevin it's not a strange one. It makes complete sense. But if that is what Q was doing, then yes, completely wrong response in that moment, where he should have been saying, no, Q, we want you to stay. Really,
Yes.
please stay. Yeah.
Yes. Please. No, don't go. Please.
No,
Yeah.
stop. What are you
Yeah.
doing?
Yes. All right. Well, the 7th rule covers idols and advantages in game mechanics. And I just mentioned Tevin's extra vote, which honestly I'd kind of forgotten about. But the other players
Mm,
hadn't. Maria burned her extra vote just before the merge so people wouldn't worry about it becoming a threat. But Tevin's was still out there.
mm.
I don't personally consider an extra vote to be that big of a deal. Obviously, some players see things differently.
Yeah. I do think that the extra vote idea is scarier than the way that it's been
Yes.
utilized. However, when you find yourself in a situation like we have seen, where people have lost their votes for various
Mm-hmm.
things, and who knows what other strange things Jeff has in store, that there's a potential that an extra vote could actually have a greater effect than it would in just the normal course of things with Survivor, when everybody has a vote and you don't
Mm-hmm.
really need to worry about these things as people losing their vote. But yes, but I can understand it is an extra concern, and sometimes it can come down to one vote. It really can. When you
It
start
can.
splitting votes, it certainly can.
It can. It can. It's just that how many times has it been used successfully? Not many.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. Like
Yeah.
it really hasn't. I'm curious, wouldn't it be fun if oh no, I don't want to say that out loud because I'm gonna give Jeff an extra idea.
What, to have him trade the extra vote for the rice?
No, if
That's
you could
oh.
have if you could carry the extra vote into if you are on the jury, and then you can vote an
Oh,
extra
there you
time for a
go.
winner.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I don't think even I hesitate to say I don't think even Jeff would do that because there's, he might, but
There's
yeah,
so many things he's been willing to
right,
do up to this point.
right.
Just an idea.
Yeah. Now, one interesting thing I want to mention is that we thought Tevin had told his tribe a modified version of what happened on his journey, claiming they
Mm.
didn't know who got the extra vote or lost their vote until tribal council. But it turned out he was telling the absolute truth, and we were just shown it as if he was telling a story. He explained in interviews that they really didn't know who Maria picked until he later sat out of a challenge
Yeah.
at the same time she did, and they compared notes on the sidelines. I'm
Editing.
I'm surprised that didn't come up when Jelinski was voted out. That they really didn't know. But yeah,
Even we're still talking about Jelinski.
that's right. That's right. All right. Well, we can move to Appendix A, which is about the players keeping their end goals in mind when voting. And we talk about voting out the weak, then the strong, then the weak, then the strong. Now, we're still at the point in the game where players should be targeting strong threats. As Tiffany said in a slightly different way, the point of the game where you're just getting out obvious targets is done, which is the main reason people keep letting Venus slide by. And as I said last
Mm-hmm.
week, they probably will until the end. Tiffany said it best by noting that Venus hasn't done anything other than mentioning Tevin's name to people who didn't take her seriously. Quote, who cares? Let her stick around. And then she added to us, Venus thinks she's a power player, but she's really not. I think I'd rather deal with a nuisance than a threat. So that explains why they didn't go after the person Tevin really wanted out.
Right.
But the question is, were they correct to get rid of him instead?
Well, and this is the part of Survivor that I find the most fascinating. When there are those players that individuals have kind of written off and said,
Mm-hmm.
you know what? They don't matter. It'll be fine. We'll get to them later. And then what happens? Oh my gosh, that person is in the final 3
Well,
and
right.
it's taken a spot away from someone else or ends up winning like the final, immunity
Right.
challenge back when there was no fire making. I'm thinking of was it Jenna that ended up winning that like final and everyone
Yeah.
wanted her voted out and then she won and then she was
Mm-hmm.
like ha look at me now I'm in the finals. So there are those moments, Mike Holloway's, where like
Right.
they're winning and then they get there and so that's a real issue. That's a potential concern because her story, if she and I know you've said she's probably a no vote finalist if
Mm-hmm.
she makes it to the final 3, but it's like that scrappy underdog, look at everything I had to do. None of you like me. I had to fight to be here. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they'll just be like, no, we let you stay because you weren't a threat to any of us. But we've seen it happen more than once where someone is just kind of allowed to continue because we'll get to them later. They don't matter that much. And then they wreak havoc or they find their way to the final 3.
Right. Right. But okay, was it right to get rid of Tevin? Did the other players make the right move?
Well, yes. I mean, but I'm just saying this
Yeah.
could be one of those situations where if they're showing Tiffany saying, who cares about her? I
Right.
bet you Tiffany's going to care about her.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Yeah. I mean, as far as the Tevin thing, I think it's a mixed bag. If things were as simple as having the 6 and a few additional associates like Liz, then the vote would have been pretty easy. But as you mentioned earlier, the members of the 6 seem eager to turn on each other because of
Yes.
other previous alliances.
It's a
Tim did it
terrible
with
6.
Yeah, Tim did it with Hunter, causing Q to turn on Tim. Tiffany didn't narrow her focus down to just those outside the 6 when talking to Tevin, so Tevin and Q turned on her. And then after Liz brought up turning on her own tight ally Tevin, various members of the 6 were all over that because of the threat level they saw from him.
Right.
As far as alliances go, Charlie hit the nail on the head in saying it was, quote, probably the shakiest 6 that's ever existed. And then later, he said that the alliance had, quote, 0 legs. It's going nowhere. And,
Mhm.
quote, it's the loosest use of the word alliance that has ever existed.
Yes.
Uh,
I think milk it for everything you can, Charlie. Get all the information you
yes.
can from the 6 and then you'll know what's going on in the game.
Right. I mean, everyone just keeps turning on their allies because they're worried about losing to them at the end or because of some other seemingly silly reason. And it's just
Mhm.
become a free for all at this point.
Mhm. Yeah, so it'll be like who'll be in the final 3? Ben, Venus, and who
Yeah.
else is not in the 6 at this
Yeah.
point? It'll be
Ugh.
everyone who is not in the 6.
Yeah. Kenzie.
Kenzie, there we
Um,
go. Oh my gosh, wouldn't that be hilarious?
I think Kenzie wins, but yes.
Yes, I don't
Yeah.
disagree.
Yeah. Now, the question has come up as to whether Hunter should have played his idol for Tevin. I would have to say no for a couple reasons. First, I don't know that Hunter ever accepted that Tevin was indeed going to be voted out. He rejected it initially when Q told him, and then he scrambled to try to, make it not happen. And based on him voting for Venus at tribal council, I really doubt anyone told him the truth of what was happening, even though all the others clearly knew it.
Yeah, and I think too he was putting a lot of faith in what he was being told by Tevin, who was his number 1.
Yes.
And Tevin is saying, "Vote Venus." And so Hunter was like, "Okay." Because I don't
Yeah.
I mean, you saw Hunter. He his head
Yeah.
in his hands,
This is the
didn't know what was
dumbest
going
thing
on.
ever. Yes.
Right, and so I think it was one of those situations where he is relying on or was relying on
Hmm.
Tevin very heavily when it came to that social component, the strategic component. I don't feel like Hunter has connected with as many people as Tevin has, and so I do think that Hunter was relying very heavily on Tevin's read of
Hmm.
what was going on in the game and the information that Tevin had, because I just don't think Hunter is accumulating that much as
Yeah.
far as that information.
Yeah. Now, the second reason that I say that he should not have played it is even if he did know Tevin was going, Hunter hopefully realizes that he's going to need that idol himself for the next time he doesn't win immunity.
That he's
I
not hanging upside down from
yes,
a pole.
I was going to say
Lord have mercy.
that's one reason I'm not fully sure he knows that he's going to need that protection. Um, but he should because he will. The 6 isn't going to protect him.
No, and wow, why would you show everyone? I mean, they've already seen his abilities, but
Yeah.
my God, that was impressive.
Yes, it was. Um, yeah. All right. Well, we can move to Appendix B, which is about the jury phase. And while Tevin wasn't sent to the jury for any specific reason in terms of like planting him there to vote for someone, he was taken out of the game in part because Liz wanted to ensure he wouldn't be there at the end to claim credit as the master manipulator.
Hmm.
So she is definitely looking ahead to the end game and trying to ensure she gets there with a combination of people that allows her to win. Um, and based on what Charlie mentioned regarding the 6, I think he is as well. There are several people looking
Right.
ahead and realizing we don't want Tevin there when we get there.
Yeah. And Tevin, I think, would have done a phenomenal job in Final Tribal.
Oh, absolutely. He'd have
Hmm.
put on a whole Shakespearean play.
He probably would have stood up,
Yes.
walked about.
Walked
Hmm.
around.
I
Yes.
love that.
So, all right. Well, it is about time to wrap things up. So, what are your final thoughts on Tevin?
I have to say, from the moment I heard him speak and provide information in his pregame interviews, I was incredibly intrigued and fascinated. Anyone who says they want to be Heather Chandler, I love you. I love you very much because she is an incredible character to emulate. Such an incredible person Tevin was, and I do think that he brought a certain sense of himself to this game. We really got to learn who Tevin was. I know he narrated much of the episode, so it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see that no longer being a component of the season. But overall, Tevin really did come into this game understanding who he was, understanding how other people would perceive him. He was very
Hmm.
cognizant of his concerns with Hunter and then what Hunter was going to think about him, and was he going to think he was small and not that strong. He was very, very aware of Venus going into the game, wanting to get to know Venus, wanting to work with Venus, and then realizing very quickly that's not a good relationship. So I have to give him so much credit for finding those people that he connected with and figuring out a way to maintain those connections with so many individuals. It's not an easy thing to do, to come into a game like this knowing nobody, knowing nothing about them, but finding something about them, something as silly as a sitcom from like 1952 or whatever it was, that you have a connection suddenly. And so I really do think overall Tevin's sense of self allowed him to excel socially. It allowed him to make those connections and make those bonds. However, it really did work against him because he came in like this force that he is, and people saw that, and people saw that he was going to be a very needed person to get through this game up to a certain point, and then when the time was right, they were going to strike, and that's exactly what I think ended up happening. It was very clear who Tevin was. It was very clear that he was a huge threat to win this game, and someone needed to take him out, and they did. They stepped up, and when you have so many alliances and only one person really has your back at that point, I think that speaks volumes of the fact that you are truly a threat and that people are concerned you're going to win this game. So sorry, Tevin, to see you go, but I do hope someday you get to play Heather Chandler. That would be amazing.
Tevin, my winner.
Oh, here we go.
He had so much potential. As I said in our preview podcast, I liked him from the moment I saw him on the initial commercials for the season. And I was right to think that his personality would be infectious and being an actor would help him connect with people. Tevin wanted people to underestimate him. I just don't think it ever happened. He was the central hub in the Nami tribe and would have been safe if they had ever gone to tribal council. That carried over into the merge as he had alliances with everyone on his own tribe except Venus, a separate one with Maria from their journey, and was brought into the Six. Everybody wanted to work with him until he made his move against Soda and Liz realized where she stood relative to him, which was in his shadow. It didn't seem very difficult for her to rally votes against him because they all saw the same thing that she saw, that he was a huge threat if he was allowed to proceed. All of his positives turned into negatives. He was likable, but too likable. He had allies, but too many allies. He got people to work together, but it was too much control. Tevin said in his pregame interviews that he was opposed to Final Four firemaking, and we cheered him for him and still do.
Yes.
Ironically, it was Liz, whose own hot take is that she likes Final Four firemaking, who sparked the blaze among other players to snuff Tevin's torch. And that is why Tevin lost.
See, it all comes back to fire making at 4.
Yes.
Oh, goodness.
All right.
That silliness.
Well, before we get to predictions
Mhm.
for the next episode, I want to remind everyone that the rules we just discussed are available in both poster form
That's
and
right.
t-shirt form. So again, just go to robhaswebsite.com/yxlostfeed.
Yes, you should.
And until then, where can people find us?
Oh, we're doing that? But that's before we do the predictions?
Yes,
Oh my
it
gosh,
has
I'm
been.
so thrown. I'm so thrown off right now. Okay, so people can maybe find me at Jessica Lewis 89 on Twitter, and I say maybe because I don't post as much as I used to, but I do live tweet. This past Wednesday, I was a little bit busy, so unfortunately, I could not. However, I did play catch up. So, but you certainly can check me out there. I'm at Jessica Lewis 6789 on Instagram. However, my co-host over here, David Bloomberg, is everywhere. He is so much so that he has an entire page dedicated to all of the places you can find all of the David Bloomberg content. And there it is. It's on the screen for those watching. David Bloomberg, take it away.
Yes, you can find all of my accounts through my link tree at linktree/David Bloomberg with a dot before the EE in the URL for Linktree. Or you can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky as at David Bloomberg, and on the video platforms TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram as at David Bloomberg TV. I'm also at David Bloomberg TV on Threads because that's connected to Instagram. I apparently was a little bit ahead of the game. I had mentioned that I'm not posting to Post anymore a few weeks ago, and then Post just announced they're probably shutting down. So clearly, it was me. It was me leaving that caused that.
Look at you. You're causing
Yes,
winner picks to get voted out.
that's
Now you're
right.
shutting down whole websites.
That's right. Um, uh, I mentioned, on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, I'm posting 2 or 3 videos per day. I'm, of course, posting clips from US Survivor, plus from other shows like Deal or No Deal and Amazing Race. Although, for some reason, I just haven't found many clips from Amazing Race, I have to say. Um,
Mm.
and the circle just started, so I'm sure that I will have some clips there too. Now, one more thing before we talk about predictions for next week, and that is that you won't be here next week to find out
I
how your
won't.
predictions do. You will be at Adam Klein's wedding.
I will
Uh,
be.
so instead, I will be joined by Survivor 44 Heidi Laguerre Greenblatt.
Yay! Thank you, Heidi. I appreciate you so much for stepping in. I will miss you, David. I will miss our listeners. However, I will be getting to have a great time with some prior Survivor players, friends of mine. I'm excited to see Adam. I'm very happy and ready to celebrate with him and
Yes.
his bride to be.
Yes. All right. Time for predictions. The preview showed us that next week people are pissed at Q, which is not exactly a surprise. And then there's also some other people turning on one another as well. And then you've got kind of Charlie and Maria sitting in the center, just looking around and in a good position, I think.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think the first thing I mentioned is key. And I know it goes against Hubicki's law to suggest this, but I really think people are just going to be fed up with Q.
Uh-huh.
We heard it from some players, even in tribal council. He will not have the 6 or the 5 or whatever to keep him safe. His Yanu allies know that he revealed Tiffany's idol. Plus, I'm sure that they'll also find out he was the one pushing to vote her out.
Mm,
If he doesn't win immunity, I do not see how he makes it past next week's vote.
that's interesting. Well, if they take the same approach that they are to Venus, where they're like, well, whatever,
Yeah,
he can stick around.
I don't see them
Well,
doing
because
him
you don't think they're gonna do that with him?
because he's just been too much of a force. She's
He
never
has
had any power. He had power and could regain it.
yeah. Hmm.
I mean, they may say that. You're right. They may say that. I just think it would be a mistake for them to say that.
Oh, I don't disagree, but I'm looking at the oh gosh. I'm very intrigued to because this is where like the quiet ones just like you said Maria and Charlie are just kind of
Mhm.
sitting there just listening. I feel like the focal point is no longer going to be on those quiet players. Ben, I think, will be kind of there as well. People
Mhm.
won't be focusing on Ben, but Hunter is like front and center as far as issues for all of them
He is,
winning
but
challenges.
he'll either win a challenge or use his idol, I would think.
I would think so too. I would hope that he would realize that that's what he needs
Yeah.
to do. Oh gosh. I mean, I think you're right. I think it has to be Q because I don't know who is going to. I mean, Tiffany and Kenzie are done with him. So there's really not going to be a whole lot of people
Mhm.
fighting for him. And I think after everything that they saw, and this is why I'm very interested to see what his response is going to be,
Right.
because if he comes back and says that was all part of my grand plan to save Tiffany, well then that shows you're a strategic mastermind. So who wants that around either, right?
Right.
So I feel like he's going to be damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. If they don't know what he did, they're just going to be like, he needs to go. And if he tries to explain it, they're going to be like, he needs to go. So yeah, I
Mhm.
agree. I think it's going to be Q.
Okay. All right. Well, we will find out, and I'll be I'll be sure to let you know. Um,
I know. Well,
all right.
I will likely be watching it on Wednesday though,
Okay.
because I will be able to watch, but I just won't be able to be involved in the discussion of it with
Yeah.
you. So
Yeah. All right. Well, as we wrap up, I want to encourage people to check out the RHAP patron program at robhasawebsite.com/patron. You can get access to all the special podcasts that are put out, plus Facebook groups and Discord. And now Rob is doing even more with Discord. Like after Know-It-Alls, he jumped onto Discord for a Q&A and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So you get all of that and more. And you can support shows like ours and everything on the network by becoming a patron again at robhasawebsite.com/patron. Also, make sure you're subscribed to all of the reality TV Rahap Up podcasts by going to robhasawebsite.com/Rahap Ups feeds and selecting your podcast service of choice. You'll find us, obviously, the B&B, Survivor International, and podcasts from a whole host of other shows, whether it's Big Brother Canada or just all the different shows that are on. And so, again, just make sure you're subscribed to the Rahap Ups feed.
You definitely should subscribe. And I would like to thank everyone at the RHAP Ups for creating all of the content that you just heard David speak of, the editing that is led by Scott St. Pierre. Thank you so much to his team and everyone who is involved in the process, not only editing for our podcast, but also all of the content that you did hear David speak about. There is so much available out there, and it's just so incredible that Rob has been able to put together this team that works for him and also provide all of this incredible content for all of the listeners. So thank you so much for all the support that the listeners are providing. And thank you to everything that we receive for the podcast itself from Rob and company. So thanks.
Yes. And of course, thank you, Jessica, for another great episode and for supporting me in my time of sorrow. You did such a great job.
Listen, I wanted to be so mean and I wanted to just be like, ha ha, someone lost a random pick. But then you were crying and it was this whole thing. And
Yeah.
I did think Tevin
You've
was
heard of pretend
great.
to be nice. I pretend to be crying. So,
Yes,
um,
yes. Tevin, it was this guy's fault. So just know that
no,
moving
no,
forward.
no, of course not. I don't know why you would say that. Oh, yeah, the shirt that I'm wearing.
Yeah,
Um,
that.
yeah. So, as I mentioned earlier, have a great time at Adam's wedding. Pass along my
Thanks.
congratulations to them.
I will.
We will see you in 2 weeks, while Heidi and I will be right back here next week. And of course, everyone can find me pretty much everywhere except Post. Until
Everywhere.
then. So, all right. Bye.
Bye.